Rabbit food ain't gonna save you out there.
Oh my God, what is that?
His sneer, sharp as a blade, cut through the veteran's hall. She simply picked up a stray piece of quinoa, her gaze unwavering, and continued eating her salad calmly. They saw her, a quiet Marine, as nothing, weak, soft, a stain on their brotherhood. Their laughter was a brutal, relentless dismissal, a mistake they'd soon regret. But then the mountain fell silent, except for the screams. 3 Marines down, 5 miles out, stranded. She stood alone against the storm, and then she moved. What happens when true strength, forged in silence, is finally unleashed? And what will they do when she proves them terrifyingly wrong? Hello, veteran biker here. Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The Harbor Light Veterans Center, California, hummed with the stale scent of coffee and unspoken histories on a brisk Thursday afternoon. It was the weekly gathering for the South Bay Veterans Support Group, often a stage for performative masculinity. Sergeant Fallon Hayes, 32, moved through the space with quiet precision, her worn canvas bag barely rustling. 3 years discharged, her slight frame and gentle demeanor belied the intense flash in her dark eyes, making her feel perpetually an outsider. The meeting had just ended, but familiar snickers drifted from across the room. Fallon didn't need to look up. They were mocking her Thursday lunch again, the same quinoa and vegetable bowl. "I swear, Hayes, you're going to blow away in the next strong wind," bellowed Captain Victor Sterling. His voice carried the same dismissive tone he'd used for years. Victor, a towering 6'2" with a perpetual scowl, embodied the rigid Marine who hadn't adapted to civilian life. "How do you even make it through boot camp eating grass?" A chorus of chuckles erupted from his circle of men, mostly in their 40s and 50s. To them, her vegetarianism wasn't just a preference. It symbolized weakness, everything wrong with new service members, and an affront to military culture. Fallon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her left hand, resting on her messenger bag, flexed involuntarily, causing a barely visible, intricate scar from a combat injury on her knuckles to throb with a dull, familiar ache, a Purple Heart souvenir, a constant reminder of enduring pain. Yet she continued packing her notebook and thermos with the same methodical care she applied to everything. Each precise movement was a small act of dignity, a silent refusal to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Leave her alone, Victor," came a voice from near the coffee station. "Doctor!" Elise Conway, the group's facilitator, a woman with compassionate eyes that missed nothing, shot him a disgusted look while refilling her mug. Dr. Conway had spent years navigating the complex psychological landscapes of traumatized veterans, and Victor's bullying grated on her professional sensibilities. She was a beacon of quiet strength in the tumultuous room, a figure of calm authority. "I'm just saying, Victor," Fallon continued, his voice getting louder as he sensed an eager, if somewhat uneasy, audience. "Back in my day, Marines ate meat, real food. You needed that protein, that strength. How are you going to carry a wounded teammate when you're running on lettuce and good intentions?" The room fell uncomfortably quieter at that last comment, the way conversations do when someone crosses a line they didn't know existed, a boundary of unspoken etiquette. Fallon's hands stilled for just a moment, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. She'd heard variations of this particular attack before, the insidious suggestion that her diet somehow made her less capable, less reliable, less of a Marine than the rest of them. It was an old wound, poked and prodded, designed to undermine her very identity. Dr. Elise Conway cleared her throat from the front of the room, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who'd spent years managing delicate group dynamics among traumatized veterans. Victor, I think we've covered this topic enough for one session. Fallon's dietary choices are her own business. But Victor wasn't finished. He'd had a few beers before the meeting. Fallon could smell the stale alcohol on him from across the room, its pungent aroma hinting at the unraveling of his self-control, and alcohol had a way of stripping away what little filter he possessed, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. "I'm just worried about unit cohesion, Doc," he slurred, attempting to sound concerned, yet his tone dripped with condescension. "What happens when the chips are down? When someone's life depends on real strength, not whatever you get from tofu and spinach?" His words were a direct public challenge aimed at her core. Fallon finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting Victor's bloodshot stare directly. The room seemed to hold its breath, every veteran waiting for her response, for a crack in her composure. She'd been coming to these meetings for 3 years, enduring the same tired jokes, the same dismissive questions, the same condescending attitudes. Part of her, a deep, tired part, wanted to simply walk away, to find a different group. Maybe one where former service members didn't feel the need to constantly prove their worth through outdated concepts of masculinity and strength. Instead, she stood slowly, shouldering her bag with practiced ease, her movements deliberate, controlled. "I guess we'll find out if it ever comes to that," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough steel, just enough quiet authority to remind everyone present that she'd worn the exact same uniform they had, earned the same eagle, globe, and anchor that proudly decorated Victor's faded baseball cap. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, charged with the kind of tension that comes when unspoken hierarchies are challenged, when a perceived inferior dares to speak as an equal. Fallon had served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, her combat record impeccable, yet her quiet demeanor and unconventional lifestyle choices had somehow diminished her credibility, stripped her of her earned respect in the eyes of her fellow veterans. They saw her vegetarianism not as a choice, but as a fundamental weakness, her gentleness not as compassion, but as an inability to handle the harsh, unforgiving realities of military life. They viewed her choice to pursue healing over hardness as some kind of betrayal of Marine Corps values, a softness that was an affront to their very identity. What they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly see, was the way her hands remained steady when others shook during intense group therapy sessions. They didn't notice how her breathing stayed controlled, almost meditative, when others hyperventilated or spiraled into panic. They failed to observe how she always instinctively positioned herself near the exits, how her eyes automatically catalogued potential threats and escape routes, how her posture remained subtly alert, even in moments of apparent relaxation. These were not traits learned in a yoga studio. These were the deeply ingrained habits of someone who'd seen prolonged combat, who de-operated in environments where a moment's inattention, a split-second lapse in situational awareness, could mean catastrophic death. As Fallon walked toward the exit, she passed by a bulletin board covered with flyers for various veterans' activities, hiking groups, bowling leagues, and volunteer opportunities at local schools. Her eyes lingered on one particular flyer, a vibrant splash of color amidst the muted background. A weekend camping trip organized by the Marine Corps League, designed to help veterans reconnect with nature and each other. It promised 2 days of hiking and campfire stories in the majestic Whisperwind Peaks, a chance to rebuild the frayed bonds that military service had forged in fire. She'd been thinking about signing up for weeks, drawn by the allure of the mountains and the unspoken promise of genuine connection. But Victor's constant, relentless harassment, his insidious questioning of her strength, had made her hesitate. The last thing she needed was to be trapped in the wilderness with people who saw her as a liability, who questioned her fundamental strength and commitment based solely on what she chose to eat. But as she stood there, listening to the continued murmur of conversation behind her, the low thrum of their judgments, Fallon made a decision that would change everything, a quiet defiance that would echo through the coming days. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed a text to the trip organizer, Ethan Croft, confirming her spot on the weekend excursion. If Victor Sterling wanted to question her capabilities, if he truly wanted to test whether lettuce and good intentions could measure up to traditional Marine strength, then she'd give him that opportunity. She would not back down. What Fallon didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in just 2 short weeks, on a treacherous mountain trail in the Whisperwind Peaks, Captain Victor Sterling's condescending question would be answered in the most dramatic, brutal way possible. 3 Marines would fall wounded, screaming in the darkness. Help would be hours away, cut off by the unforgiving wilderness. And the woman they'd mocked for her dietary choices would prove irrevocably that true strength comes from places they'd never even thought to look, from a wellspring of inner fortitude beyond their comprehension. As she pushed through the glass doors of the Veterans Center into the cool California evening, Fallon Hayes had no idea that she was about to become the kind of hero whose story would be told for generations, a legend forged in silence and sacrifice. All she knew in that moment was that she was tired of being dismissed, tired of having her worth questioned by people who confused brute volume with genuine strength, aggression with true capability. The mountain was calling, and Sergeant Fallon Hayes was ready to answer. The pre-dawn light barely kissed the horizon when the alarm clock on Fallon Hayes's nightstand, a simple, unadorned digital device, flashed 5:47 a.m. Her eyes snapped open instantly, 3 minutes before it was even set to ring. Old habits from the Corps died hard, if they ever truly died, and her internal clock still operated on military precision, even after 3 years of civilian life. She lay still for a moment in the quiet solitude of her small apartment, listening. The familiar sounds of her Los Angeles neighborhood slowly stirred to life, the distant, almost meditative hum of traffic beginning to build on Interstate 5, the sharp, intermittent bark of Mrs. Rodriguez, his ancient Chihuahua next door, and the steady, calming rhythm of her own breathing, which had long ago ceased to be a mere biological function and had become a meditation in itself. Fallon's apartment reflected the same minimalist discipline that governed every aspect of her life. The furniture was sparse but functional, chosen for utility rather than aesthetics. A single bed, its corners made with military-precise folds, dominated the small bedroom. A modest dining table that seamlessly doubled as a desk, cluttered only with a single well-worn tablet. A bookshelf lined not with popular fiction, but with an eclectic mix of veterinary textbooks and philosophy texts in equal measure, hinting at the complex layers of her intellect. The only decorations were a few carefully placed photographs: her graduation from boot camp, her squad in Afghanistan, their faces grimed but resolute, and a faded picture of her grandmother, her face etched with wisdom, tending a vibrant vegetable garden back in Salinas, a quiet nod to her roots and her choices. She moved through her morning routine with the same methodical precision she displayed in every task, the same meticulous care she'd applied to packing her bag at the veterans meeting. 20 minutes of disciplined yoga on a worn mat in the living room, focusing on poses designed to help manage the chronic, deep-seated pain in her left shoulder. It was a souvenir from an IED blast outside Kandahar, a searing memory that had earned her a Purple Heart and an early, reluctant discharge from active duty. The pain was a constant companion, a quiet reminder of her past, but she managed it, controlled it, refusing to let it control her. This was followed by 30 minutes of profound meditation, sitting cross-legged on a cushion, meticulously practicing the breathing techniques that had become her lifeline during the worst of her PTSD episodes, pulling her back from the brink of panic and despair, grounding her firmly in the present moment. The kitchen ritual came next, a sanctuary of control and intention, and this was where Fallon's true passion, her deepest convictions, truly revealed themselves. She moved between the refrigerator and the countertop like a chef in a high-end Michelin-starred restaurant, assembling her ingredients with the same meticulous attention to detail she'd once applied to field stripping an M4 rifle or preparing a complex tactical brief. Fresh, vibrant spinach from the local farmer's market, still dewy from the morning. Quinoa she'd cooked in bulk on Sunday, its fluffy grains ready. Roasted chickpeas, seasoned precisely with turmeric and smoked paprika, their aroma rich and inviting. Avocado, sliced with surgical precision, its creamy green contrasting with the other colors. Each component was carefully measured, perfectly balanced for optimal nutrition and sustained energy, a testament to her profound understanding of her body as a finely tuned machine. This wasn't just about avoiding meat, not merely a dietary choice. However, her decision to become a vegetarian had been a profound one, made during her second deployment when she'd spent 3 days trapped in a bombed-out building with a wounded goat that reminded her with heartbreaking clarity of the beloved pet she'd had as a child. It was about taking control of the one thing she truly could control in a world that often felt chaotic, unpredictable, and entirely beyond her influence. Food was fuel, yes, but it was also medicine, comfort, and a daily conscious act of self-care that helped keep the invisible demons of her past firmly at bay. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Elise Conway, the Veterans Group facilitator, a voice of quiet support. "Don't let Victor get to you. Your strength shows in ways he'll never understand." Fallon smiled slightly, a rare, genuine curve of her lips as she carefully packed her meticulously prepared lunch. Elise had become more than just a group facilitator over the past 3 years. She'd become a trusted mentor, a confidant who understood that healing took many forms. That strength wasn't always measured in how much weight you could lift or how loudly you could shout, but in resilience, quiet determination, and self-compassion. Her drive to her job at the Wild Heart Haven, the animal shelter where she found purpose, took her through neighborhoods that eloquently told the complex story of her city's intricate relationship with its military community. Past the sprawling base housing where young Marines lived with their families, their lives mirroring the routines she once knew. Through downtown, where homeless veterans gathered under freeway overpasses, their lostness was a stark contrast to the structured lives of their active duty counterparts. And finally, to the modest building where she spent her days caring for animals that, like many veterans, had experienced profound trauma and needed endless patience to heal, to trust again. Fallon's official title was Animal Care Specialist, but her colleagues had quickly learned that her skills, her intuitive understanding, went far beyond what any job description required. She had an intuitive, almost telepathic understanding of animal behavior that came from years of reading subtle body language in high stress, combat situations, of knowing precisely when to advance and when to retreat, when to show strength and when to offer quiet comfort. The most aggressive dogs, their hackles raised, their teeth bared, calmed under her steady, unyielding presence. Cats traumatized by abuse, hissing and cowering, learned to trust again through her patient, consistent care and her gentle touch. "Morning, Hayes!" called out Director Reese Dalton, the facilities manager, a former Navy SEAL himself, as Fallon clocked in. "We've got a new arrival in Kennel 12, German Shepherd mix, owner surrender, pretty aggressive. Bit 2 people at intake yesterday. Think you can work your magic?" Fallon nodded, already mentally preparing for the encounter, her mind assessing potential threats and strategies. Aggressive dogs were often her specialty, not because she was fearless. Fear was a useful emotion that kept you alive, a crucial survival instinct, but because she understood that aggression was usually fear wearing a different, more formidable mask. She'd learned that profound lesson about herself during her first deployment, when she'd realized that her own carefully controlled demeanor, her quiet composure, was as much about managing her own deep-seated fear as it was about projecting unshakable strength. The German Shepherd was indeed aggressive, snarling and lunging at the kennel door, teeth bared, when Fallon approached. But she didn't recoil or respond with dominance displays the way some handlers might, which would only escalate the situation. Instead, she sat down cross-legged just outside the kennel, close enough to be present, to acknowledge the dog's terror, but far enough away to respect the dog's desperate need for space. She didn't speak, didn't make direct eye contact, didn't demand anything from him. She simply existed in the space, breathing steadily, projecting the kind of calm, unshakable confidence that had once helped her talk down a traumatized Afghan interpreter who'd been ready to bolt into Taliban territory, utterly convinced he was going to die. 20 minutes later, the dog was lying down, still watchful, but no longer snarling, its tense body slowly relaxing. By lunch break, he was taking treats from Fallon's hand through the kennel bars, a tiny bridge of trust being built. By the end of her shift, she had him on a leash, walking calmly through the facility, a testament to her intuitive understanding. "I don't know how you do it," said Mia Santos, one of the newer volunteers, watching in amazement. "That dog looked like he wanted to kill someone this morning." Fallon knelt down to scratch behind the dog's ears, noting the tentative wag of his tail, trust building one fragile moment at a time. "He's not aggressive," she said quietly, her voice a soft murmur. "He's scared. Sometimes those look the same from the outside, but the response needs to be completely different." It was a lesson she'd learned about herself, about many of the veterans in her support group, about the world in general. People and animals often acted out of their wounds, their deep-seated fears, and their unprocessed trauma. What looked like weakness to people like Victor Sterling was often the result of incredibly difficult choices, of complex survival strategies that had been necessary at one time but no longer served their purpose, morphing into behavioral patterns. During her lunch break, Fallon sat in the small, sun-dappled employee garden behind the building, eating her carefully prepared meal while reading a text from her cousin. "Corbin, heard you signed up for that camping trip. Are you sure that's a good idea? Those guys give you enough grief already." Fallon typed back slowly, deliberately. Someone needs to show them that there are different kinds of strength. What she didn't add, what she kept locked away, was that she needed to prove it to herself as much as to them. 3 years of civilian life had softened some of her military edge, had taught her gentleness and patience, and the profound value of choosing peace over conflict. But sometimes, late at night when the nightmares came, when the memories surged, she wondered if Victor Sterling might be right. Had she lost something essential when she'd chosen a different path? Had her hard-won compassion inadvertently made her weak? The camping trip would answer that question one way or another. In the looming presence of the Whisperwind Peaks, surrounded by the very people who questioned her fundamental strength, Fallon Hayes would discover what she was truly made of. And so would they. The Marine Corps League meeting room at VFW Post 25,563 buzzed with the kind of aggressive camaraderie that Captain Victor Sterling lived for. Folding chairs were arranged in rigid military precision, coffee brewed in industrial-strength urns, its aroma mingling with the familiar smell of Old Spice and testosterone that had followed him through 22 years of active duty and 15 years of retirement. This was his domain, his kingdom of khaki and complaints, where his word carried the weight of rank and tradition unchallenged. Victor stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, addressing the 23 Marines who'd signed up for the Whisperwind Peaks camping expedition. His voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd never quite figured out how to exist without subordinates to command. "Gentleman and lady," he added with a barely concealed smirk in Fallon's direction, singling her out. "We've got 48 hours in some of the most beautiful and challenging terrain California has to offer." The lady comment drew forced chuckles from his usual crew. Sergeant Dax Coleman, a stocky man whose beer guts strained against his Marine Corps polo shirt, leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone watching his favorite TV show, always eager to validate Victor's opinions. Next to him sat Gunnery Sergeant Kane Orrin, whose permanent scowl had deepened over the years, like lines carved by relentless wind and deep-seated disappointment. These men had served honorably, had answered their country's call, but civilian life had left them adrift, clinging desperately to past glories and outdated notions of what strength truly looked like. "Now this isn't a Boy Scout camping trip," Victor continued, his eyes scanning the room with the intense scrutiny of someone conducting a pre-mission briefing. "We're talking 10-mile hikes through mountain terrain, sleeping under the stars, cooking over open fires, real Marine Corps stuff. I need to know that everyone here can pull their weight, because in the mountains, weakness gets people killed." His gaze lingered pointedly on Fallon, who sat in the back row with the same composed, unreadable expression she wore during support group meetings. She'd learned long ago not to react to his provocations, not to give him the perverse satisfaction of seeing her flinch, of confirming his biases. But Victor wasn't finished making his point. "Which brings me to a concern I have," he said, setting down his clipboard and crossing his arms, his posture signaling a definitive statement. "We've got someone on this trip whose idea of proper nutrition is rabbit food and tree bark. Now, I'm not saying names, but when push comes to shove, when someone needs help on that mountain, I want to know that the person next to me has the strength that comes from real food, real protein, real Marine Corps values." The room fell uncomfortably quiet. Even Dax Coleman shifted in his seat, recognizing that Victor was crossing a line from legitimate leadership into outright harassment. But Victor had built his post-military identity around being the alpha dog, the self-appointed keeper of traditions, the man who said what others were thinking but didn't have the courage to voice. Fallon felt 22 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Some curious, some sympathetic, most reflecting the same unspoken question Victor had voiced: could she really be trusted when it mattered? She thought about standing up, about walking out, about finding a different group of veterans who might accept her as she was, without judgment. Instead, she remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap, waiting for the uncomfortable moment to pass, her resolve unyielding. "Victor!" came a voice from the middle of the room. Sergeant Liam Foster, a younger Marine, cleared his throat before continuing. "With respect, I think we're here to support each other, not tear each other down." Liam was younger than most of the group, perhaps 28, with the lean, athletic build of someone who still meticulously maintained his military fitness standards. He'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd proven his worth in actual combat, a subtle counterpoint to Victor's bluster. "I appreciate the concern, Foster," Victor replied, his tone suggesting he appreciated nothing of the sort, with a dismissive wave of his hand. "But leadership means making hard decisions. It means acknowledging when someone might be a liability." He turned back to Fallon, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he might use with a child, full of false concern. "Hayes, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm trying to keep everyone safe. Maybe you should consider sitting this one out." The silence that followed was deafening. Fallon felt the crushing weight of every assumption, every stereotype, every doubt that had followed her through 3 years of veteran meetings. They saw her vegetarianism as weakness, her gentleness as inability, her choice to pursue healing over hardness as some kind of profound betrayal of core Marine values. What they didn't see was the way her pulse remained steady under pressure, a calm rhythm. The way her breathing stayed controlled, even as anger built in her chest like steam in a pressure cooker, a silent furnace. They didn't know about the night patrols she'd led through Fallujah, the improvised explosive devices she'd helped disarm, the wounded Marines she'd dragged to safety, while bullets cracked overhead like a cruel whip. They knew her dietary choices. They didn't know her combat record. "I'll be there," Fallon Hayes had said, her voice carrying just enough steel to remind Captain Victor Sterling and everyone present that she'd earned her place in that room through the same blood, sweat, and sacrifice as any of them. Victor's jaw had tightened, his planned intimidation tactics thwarted by her quiet defiance. He'd expected her to back down, to excuse herself from the trip and thus validate his assessment of her perceived weakness. Her refusal only reinforced his conviction that she needed to be put in her place, shown the undeniable consequences of abandoning traditional Marine Corps toughness. "All right then," he'd said, his voice taking on a theatrical quality that suggested he was enjoying this confrontation more than any mature leader should. "But when we're out there, when the going gets tough, don't expect special treatment. Don't expect anyone to carry your pack or slow down because you're running on quinoa instead of quality protein." Corporal Alex Theron, a quiet man who'd lost his left leg below the knee to an IED in Helmand Province, spoke up from his wheelchair near the door. "Victor, maybe we should focus on the logistics instead of dietary choices. What's the weather forecast looking like?" It was a graceful attempt to redirect the conversation, and most of the room seemed grateful for the intervention, a palpable sigh of relief rippling through the ranks. But Victor wasn't ready to let go of his moment of dominance. He'd positioned himself as the guardian of Marine Corps values, the man willing to speak hard truths, and backing down now would undermine the fragile authority he'd worked so hard to establish. "The weather's going to be challenging," he said, finally turning away from Fallon, but keeping his voice pitched for maximum intimidation. "Rain predicted for Saturday night. Temperatures are dropping into the 40s, the kind of conditions that separate the Marines from the wannabes." Private Leo Walsh, the youngest member of the group at 24, raised his hand tentatively. "What should we bring for food? Are we cooking as a group or individually?" "Group cooking," Victor replied, his tone dismissive. "Sergeant Dax Coleman is bringing steaks for Saturday night. Sergeant Kane Orin is handling breakfast. I've got burgers for Friday, real food for real Marines." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering his final calculated jab. "Though I suppose some people will have to make their own arrangements." The message was chillingly clear. Fallon was on her own, excluded from the group's communal meals, marked as an outsider who'd chosen to separate herself from the Brotherhood through her dietary choices. It was petty, juvenile, and exactly the kind of behavior that drove good people away from veteran organizations. As the meeting broke up and Marines clustered in small groups to discuss logistics, Fallon remained in her seat, observing the social dynamics play out around her. She saw the way newer members deferred instinctively to Victor's aggressive authority, the way his inner circle fed off his aggression, amplifying his toxicity. She noted the way even well-meaning Marines like Liam Foster chose to avoid direct confrontation rather than challenge the established hierarchy, the path of least resistance always preferred. This was the culture she'd be entering in the Whisperwind Peaks, a world where strength was measured by outdated metrics, where conformity was valued over character, where anyone who chose a different path was viewed with suspicion and contempt. Victor Sterling had made it unequivocally clear that he saw her as a liability, a weak link that threatened the very integrity of his carefully constructed Marine identity. What Victor didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 48 short hours, their understanding of strength, weakness, and Marine Corps values would be shattered completely. The woman they dismissed as too soft, too weak, too different, would prove that true strength has nothing to do with what you eat and everything to do with what you're willing to sacrifice for others. The mountain was waiting, and Sergeant Fallon Hayes was ready to answer. The week leading up to the Whisperwind Peaks expedition revealed sides of Fallon Hayes that her fellow veterans had never bothered to notice, too consumed by their own biases, while they focused relentlessly on her dietary choices and quiet demeanor. They tragically missed the subtle, telling signs of a warrior who had simply chosen to channel her strength differently in ways they couldn't comprehend. At the Wild Heart Haven, Dr. Lena Albright, the shelter's compassionate veterinarian, watched Fallon work with a particularly challenging case, a massive pit bull mix named Titan, who'd been seized from a dog-fighting ring. The animal had been so profoundly traumatized that 3 previous handlers had tragically recommended immediate euthanasia. His file read like a horror story, detailing aggression toward humans, severe food possessiveness, and an inability to be touched without heavy sedation. Yet here was Fallon, moving through Titan's rehabilitation with the boundless patience of a saint and the strategic, calculated thinking of a seasoned general. "Most people would have given up on him by now, Doctor," Albright observed, watching through the kennel window as Fallon sat motionless, radiating calm, beside the massive, powerful dog who had finally stopped snarling long enough to tentatively accept a treat from her outstretched hand. "He just needs to remember that not all humans are enemies," Fallon replied softly, her voice barely a whisper, never taking her eyes off Titan, her focus absolute. "Trust has to be rebuilt one moment at a time. You can't force it, you can't rush it, and you can't let your own fear contaminate the process." What Dr. Albright didn't fully understand was that Fallon was speaking from an experience that went far beyond mere animal training. She was drawing on profound lessons learned in Afghan villages, in Fallujah, in Ramadi, where one wrong move, one misread signal, one moment of impatience could turn potential allies into deadly, unforgiving enemies. The same subtle, intuitive skills that had helped her navigate complex tribal politics in Kandahar province were now helping her heal a broken animal spirit, reconnecting a lost soul to humanity. "The shelter's insurance company isn't going to like this," Dr. Albright warned, a note of trepidation in her voice. "If he bites someone, if something goes wrong—" Fallon finally looked up, her gentle brown eyes meeting Dr. Albright's gaze directly, and for just a moment, Dr. Albright caught a glimpse of something steel-hard, something unyielding and ancient behind those soft features. "He won't bite," Fallon said with the kind of quiet, absolute certainty that came only from someone who'd made life-or-death decisions in the chaos of combat zones. "I know what I'm doing." That same unshakable certainty manifested in other ways throughout the week. During her lunch break, Fallon often used the shelter's small, functional gym to maintain her rigorous fitness routine. Unlike the aggressive, ego-driven weightlifting sessions favored by Marines like Dax Coleman, her workouts were methodical, functional, focused entirely on endurance rather than bulk, and designed for sustained performance. She moved through complex bodyweight exercises with fluid precision, every movement controlled and purposeful. Pistol squats require extraordinary balance and raw strength. Pull-ups performed with such controlled grace that she seemed to float rather than strain, effortlessly defying gravity. Planks held for minutes at a time while her breathing remained perfectly steady, a testament to her profound core strength and mental discipline. Director Reese Dalton, the facility manager, a former Navy SEAL before taking the civilian job, recognized elite-level fitness when he saw it, his discerning eye missing nothing. "You know," he mentioned to Fallon one afternoon, as she finished a particularly impressive set of muscle-ups, her movements seamless. "I've seen a lot of people work out over the years. You move like someone who's had serious training." "Serious, professional training." Fallon toweled off her hands, considering her response, choosing her words carefully. "The Corps taught me to take care of my body. I just never stopped." But it was more than just physical fitness. Reese had noticed the way Fallon instinctively positioned herself in any room, always with clear sight lines to exits, always acutely aware of who was coming and going, always maintaining what military professionals called tactical awareness, a constant, subtle scan of her environment for potential threats or opportunities. He'd seen her reflexes kick in when a new volunteer accidentally dropped a heavy metal food bowl, the way she'd instantly assessed the sound for threat level before visibly relaxing. These were not the casual habits of someone who'd sat behind a desk during their military service. These were the deeply ingrained instincts of a seasoned warrior. "What was your MOs?" Reese asked, using the military abbreviation for job specialty, his curiosity finally getting the better of him. 0311, Fallon replied without hesitation, her voice flat, matter-of-fact. "Rifleman." Reese's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise and recognition. "Infantry, combat arms?" he murmured, understanding dawning in his eyes. This was the job classification that put Marines squarely on the front lines in the most dangerous, unforgiving situations where split-second decisions and unyielding physical courage meant the literal difference between coming home or coming home in a box. Suddenly, her calm confidence, her quiet competence, made perfect, chilling sense. The next day, Fallon's true capabilities revealed themselves in an unexpected way, outside the context of direct combat or training. Mia Santos, the volunteer who'd been amazed by Fallon's work with aggressive dogs, was struggling to move a shipment of 50-pound dog food bags from the delivery truck to the storage room. The bags were awkward, heavy, and the delivery driver, clearly in a hurry, had stacked them carelessly in the truck bed, making them even more unwieldy. "I can call Reese to help with the forklift," Mia panted, already breathless after wrestling with just 2 bags. "No need," Fallon said, hopping up into the truck bed with surprising agility. She began moving the bags with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural, defying conventional physics. Using proper lifting technique, yes, but also something more, a kind of controlled explosiveness that suggested profound reserves of strength most people never developed, a deeply ingrained understanding of body mechanics. In 20 short minutes, she'd single-handedly moved 40 bags, never appearing to strain, never breathing hard, never showing any sign that she was performing a task that would have utterly challenged most men twice her size. When the delivery driver complimented her on the impressive display, Fallon just shrugged, a dismissive gesture. "It's all about technique and pacing," she said. "Use your legs, keep your core tight, don't fight the weight." But Mia, who'd watched the entire performance with wide-eyed amazement, recognized something far beyond good technique. This was strength born of brutal necessity, developed through years of carrying heavy equipment across difficult, unforgiving terrain, of hauling wounded teammates to safety under fire, of performing physically demanding tasks under the kind of extreme pressure that most people couldn't even begin to imagine. That evening, Fallon received a text from Liam Foster, the younger Marine who'd spoken up for her during Victor Sterling's harassment. "Hey, heard from Reese Dalton that you're pretty impressive in the gym. Want to get a workout in before the camping trip? Could use a training partner." Fallon smiled as she typed back, "Sure. Fair warning, though, I don't go easy on anyone." When they met at a local CrossFit gym the next morning, Liam quickly discovered that Fallon's warning hadn't been an empty boast. She moved through the workout with relentless efficiency, maintaining perfect form, even as the weights increased and the repetitions multiplied. During a particularly brutal series of burpees and mountain climbers, Liam found himself struggling desperately to keep pace with someone he'd unconsciously categorized as the weak link in their group, the very person Victor Sterling constantly mocked. "Jesus, Hayes," he gasped during a brief rest period, drenched in sweat. "Where'd you learn to train like this?" "2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines," she replied, barely breathing hard, her composure unwavering. "Patrol base in Sangan District. When you're carrying 60 pounds of gear through 120-degree heat, you learn to optimize everything. Your breathing, your movement, your energy systems. Efficiency becomes survival." Liam stared at her with new, profound respect, understanding dawning in his eyes. Sangan District had been one of the most violent, unforgiving areas in Afghanistan, a place where Marines faced daily contact with Taliban fighters, where survival required not just courage, but exceptional physical and mental toughness. The quiet woman Victor Sterling dismissed as weak had served in some of the heaviest fighting of the entire war. "How many deployments?" Liam asked, his voice hushed with awe. "3. Iraq twice, Afghanistan once." Fallon began preparing for the next set of exercises, her movements economic and precise. Ramadi in 08, Fallujah in 09, Sangan in 11. Each location name carried immense weight in the Marine Corps community. These weren't rear echelon assignments or safe bases. They were places where Marines died, where every single day brought new, brutal tests of courage and competence. Fallon Hayes had passed those tests repeatedly, in conditions that would have utterly broken many of the men who now questioned her strength. As they finished their workout, Liam found himself re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about his fellow veteran. The quiet woman who ate quinoa salads and spoke softly, the one Victor ceaselessly mocked, had served in the deadliest places on earth, had earned her place in the Brotherhood through her own blood and sacrifice, and had proven her worth in ways that gym exercises and camping trips could never truly measure. "Victor Sterling has no idea who he's messing with, does he?" Liam said as they collected their gear, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. Fallon's smile was enigmatic, carrying hints of knowledge and experience that most people would never possess. A quiet wisdom. "I guess we'll find out this weekend." In 48 short hours, in the majestic mountains of Whisperwind Peaks, the question of Fallon Hayes' strength would be answered definitively. But the answer wouldn't come in the form her critics expected. It would come when 3 Marines lay bleeding on a desolate mountain trail, when conventional strength had utterly failed, when the only thing standing between life and death was the kind of courage that had nothing to do with protein consumption and everything to do with the warrior spirit that burned quietly, unyielding, in Fallon's heart. The parking lot of VFW Post 25,563 buzzed with pre-dawn activity, a symphony of shifting gears, low conversations, and the clatter of equipment being loaded. As 23 Marines loaded gear into a convoy of pickup trucks and SUVs, the crisp October air carried the sharp, invigorating promise of autumn in the mountains. Excitement, a palpable energy, mixed with an undercurrent of nervous anticipation, filled the air as the group prepared for their weekend expedition to Whisperwind Peaks. Headlights cut through the lingering darkness, illuminating faces that ranged from eager anticipation to grim determination, each etched with the weight of past service and the challenge of the journey ahead. Captain Victor Sterling stood near his massive Ford F-350, a behemoth of a truck, clipboard in hand, conducting what he'd termed a gear inspection. In reality, it felt more like a final opportunity to assert his dominance, to project his unwavering authority one last time before they hit the road. A psychological warm-up for the wilderness. His truck bed was loaded with enough equipment to supply a small military outpost, coolers overflowing with meat, camping gear that looked like it had come straight from a military surplus store, and a rifle case that suggested he took his role as trip leader with an almost solemn, self-important seriousness. "Coleman, you bring that portable grill like I asked?" Victor called out to Sergeant Dax Coleman, who was struggling to fit his oversized beer cooler into an already overloaded Toyota Tacoma, panting from the exertion. "Got it, plus charcoal for both nights," Dax replied, his voice rough with effort. "This is going to be epic, man, just like the old days." Fallon Hayes arrived in her modest Honda Civic just as Victor was beginning his impromptu inspection of everyone's equipment, her quiet entrance almost swallowed by the larger vehicles and boisterous men. She'd packed lighter than anyone else, a single compact backpack containing her sleeping bag, minimal clothing, and a series of carefully prepared food containers for the weekend. Her gear was functional rather than flashy, chosen for efficiency over appearance, every item serving multiple purposes, a testament to her ingrained minimalism. "Well, well," Victor announced loudly, his voice booming across the parking lot, ensuring everyone heard his condescension. "Look who decided to show up. Hayes, let's see what you've packed for our little adventure." The group gathered around as Fallon calmly opened her backpack, and Victor immediately seized on what he saw as irrefutable evidence of her inadequacy, a clear sign of her impending failure. "Where's your tent?" he demanded, his voice laced with triumph. "I brought a tarp and a sleeping bag. I'll sleep under the stars," Fallon replied calmly, her voice even, neither defensive nor apologetic. Victor's laugh was harsh, a jarring sound in the pre-dawn air. "You're going to freeze your ass off up there." "October in Whisperwind Peaks isn't exactly beach weather." He rummaged through her pack with a possessive hand, pulling out containers of her prepared food. "And what's this? Lentil soup? Quinoa salad? Jesus, Hayes, we're going camping, not to some hippie health retreat." "I brought enough for the weekend," Fallon said, her voice still quiet, utterly devoid of apology. "I won't be a burden on anyone." "Burden," Victor repeated the word, letting it hang in the air, tasting it like something foul. "That's exactly what I'm worried about. When the temperature drops and you're shivering in that sleeping bag, when you're weak from eating rabbit food, who do you think is going to have to take care of you?" Corporal Liam Foster stepped forward, his jaw tight with barely suppressed frustration. "Victor, enough. She's here. She's prepared. Let's just get on the road." But Victor wasn't finished making his point, driven by a desperate need to assert his worldview. "This is exactly the kind of thinking that gets people hurt in the wilderness. Individual preparation affects group safety. When someone makes poor choices, everyone pays the price." Corporal Alex Theron rolled his wheelchair closer to the group, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd learned about real consequences the hard way, etched in his own body. "You know what gets people hurt? Focusing on the wrong things. Hayes's gear looks fine to me." The tension in the parking lot was palpable, a live wire humming with unspoken animosity. 23 veterans were divided, torn between those who supported Victor's aggressive, traditional leadership style and those who were beginning to seriously question whether his behavior had finally crossed the line from legitimate concern into outright mean-spirited harassment. Fallon stood at the center of it all, calm and composed, despite being the target of what amounted to public humiliation, her stillness an unshakable fortress. Ethan Croft, the official organizer of the trip, sensing the escalating conflict, finally intervened. "All right, everyone. We need to get moving if we want to make it to the trailhead by 8. Victor, you're leading Convoy 1 with Coleman, Orin and Hayes. Liam, you've got Convoy 2 with Theron and Walsh." The assignment was clearly intentional, a calculated move to put Fallon directly in Victor's vehicle, ensuring that the tension would continue uninterrupted during the 3-hour drive to Whisperwind Peaks. As they loaded into the massive F-350, Victor made sure Fallon understood the hierarchy. "You sit in the back," he ordered, his voice curt. "Coleman gets shotgun." The drive through the pre-dawn darkness of Highway 101 gave Victor ample opportunity to continue his relentless campaign of psychological warfare. With Dax Coleman as his eager, captive audience and Fallon trapped silently in the back seat, he regaled them with exaggerated stories of his military service. Each tale was carefully chosen, meticulously crafted to emphasize the paramount importance of brute strength, aggressive tactics, and an unyielding adherence to traditional Marine Corps values. "Fallujah, 2004, Victor began, his eyes meeting Fallon's in the rearview mirror, a direct challenge. "We had this one, Lance Corporal, skinny kid from Oregon. Thought he was tough because he could run fast. Well, when the expletive hit the fan, when we needed someone to carry wounded Marines out of a kill zone, that boy folded like a cheap tent. Sometimes you don't know who someone really is until they're tested." The implication was chillingly clear, and Fallon understood that this story, like most of Victor's carefully constructed narratives, was less about historical accuracy and more about establishing his own unshakable dominance, his self-perceived superiority. She'd heard countless variations of this tale before, usually told by men who needed to prove their worth, their masculinity, through other people's failures. "What happened to him?" Dax Coleman asked, playing his role as the appreciative audience, validating Victor's performance. "Transferred out," Victor replied with obvious satisfaction, a triumphant note in his voice. Command realized he wasn't Marine material. Some people just have what it takes when push comes to shove. As Highway 101 gave way to the winding mountain roads leading deep into Whisperwind Peaks, the landscape began to change dramatically. Rolling hills covered in golden sun-kissed grass gave way to steep, craggy ridges topped with ancient, towering redwoods, their massive trunks reaching for the sky. The early morning sun painted the mountains in breathtaking shades of amber and gold that momentarily took Fallon's breath away, a moment of profound beauty. This was why she'd signed up for the trip, not for Victor Sterling's approval, not for external validation, but for this visceral connection to something larger than herself, this powerful reminder that beauty and peace still existed in a world that often felt utterly dominated by conflict and aggression. "Beautiful country," she said softly, almost to herself, her voice barely a whisper, a genuine appreciation for the landscape. "Pretty enough," Victor conceded, his voice still gruff. "But don't let it fool you. These mountains will kill you if you're not prepared. The weather can change in minutes, trails can wash out, people get lost and die up here every year. This isn't some nature documentary, it's serious business. The final hour of the drive took them deep into Los Padres National Forest, where cell phone coverage disappeared entirely, and civilization felt increasingly remote, a distant memory. Fallon watched the terrain with the analytical, scrutinizing eye of someone who'd operated extensively in hostile environments. Her mind automatically cataloguing every detail: potential escape routes, vital water sources, natural defensive positions. Old habits died hard, and part of her mind automatically catalogued the tactical significance of the unforgiving landscape they were entering, an ingrained instinct. When they finally reached the trailhead parking area, the convoy gathered for final preparations. The plan was ambitious: a challenging 10-mile hike to a remote campsite, 2 nights sleeping under the vast, star-studded sky, and a different, equally challenging route back to the vehicles. The trail they'd chosen was known for its extreme difficulty, with steep ascents, treacherous rocky terrain, and severely limited water sources. "Last chance to back out," Victor announced loudly as the group shouldered their packs, his voice filled with a final, condescending challenge. "Once we start up that mountain, there's no easy way down." Fallon adjusted her pack straps, feeling the familiar weight, and checked her boots one final time, ensuring every lace was secure. Around her, 22 other Marines were making similar preparations, their faces grim, but she could feel the weight of their collective doubt pressing down on her like a physical force. They expected her to fail, to prove Victor Sterling right, to tragically validate all their preconceived assumptions about strength and weakness. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly fathom, was that this mountain, this very trail, this weekend that Victor had meticulously designed as a brutal test of her worthiness, would instead become the stage for a demonstration of courage, strength, and unwavering dedication that would profoundly redefine their entire understanding of what it truly meant to be a Marine. In less than 24 hours, 3 of these men would be fighting desperately for their lives. And the woman they dismissed as weak, as soft, as too different, would prove irrevocably that true strength has nothing to do with what you eat and everything to do with what you're willing to sacrifice for others. The mountain was calling, its ancient voice echoing, and Sergeant Fallon Hayes was ready to answer. The first day of hiking passed without major incident, though Captain Victor Sterling made sure to maintain his relentless campaign of subtle harassment throughout the 10-mile trek to their campsite. He set a punishing pace, clearly designed to test Fallon's endurance, pushing the limits of even the most experienced hikers. He made pointed, condescending comments whenever the group stopped for water breaks. "Everyone keeping up okay back there?" he'd call out, his eyes deliberately finding Fallon in the group, a mocking glint in their depths. "Don't want anyone falling behind on account of poor nutrition choices." But Fallon had maintained her position in the middle of the pack without apparent effort. Her breathing remained steady, her pace consistent, her movements fluid, seemingly unbothered by the grueling pace or the harsh terrain. Liam Foster, hiking nearby, noticed that she seemed to be holding back rather than struggling, as if she were deliberately avoiding showing her true capabilities, conserving energy. When Sergeant Dax Coleman stumbled on a loose rock section and needed help with his oversized pack, Fallon was the first to offer assistance, effortlessly steadying him, her grip suggesting reserves of strength that utterly defied Victor's assessments. The campsite Victor had chosen was spectacular. A small clearing nestled amidst towering redwoods, their ancient branches reaching towards the sky. A clear stream ran nearby, its gentle murmur a soothing sound, and breathtaking views of the Pacific Ocean were visible through strategic gaps in the canopy. As the group set up their tents and prepared for the evening, the sheer natural beauty of the location seemed to soften some of the interpersonal tensions that had marked the day's hike, a temporary truce. Fallon had been right about sleeping under the stars. While others struggled with tent stakes and guidelines in the fading light, wrestling with their equipment, she simply rolled out her sleeping bag on a flat section of ground, using her tarp as a minimalist ground cover. Her setup was efficient, requiring minimal effort, and she was already relaxing by the stream with a cup of herbal tea, its gentle steam rising in the cool evening air, while others were still wrestling with their cumbersome equipment, grumbling. "Smart," said Alex Theron, rolling his wheelchair as close to Fallon's setup as the uneven terrain would allow. "Sometimes simple is better." The evening meal, however, immediately reinforced the social divisions Victor had worked so hard to establish. The group gathered around a central fire, sharing stories, laughter, and passing around bottles of beer, while thick steaks sizzled invitingly on Dax Coleman's portable grill, their aroma filling the air. Fallon sat slightly apart, eating her lentil soup and quinoa salad, politely but firmly declining offers to share the group meal. "You sure you don't want some real food?" Sergeant Kane Orin asked, waving a perfectly grilled ribeye in her direction. "This is what camping's all about." "I'm good, thanks," Fallon replied with a calm smile. "This is exactly what I need." Victor seized the moment to make yet another point, his voice carrying. "See, this is what I'm talking about. Group cohesion, shared experiences, common purpose. When you separate yourself, when you insist on being different, it affects the whole team dynamic." Private Leo Walsh, the youngest member of the group, spoke up unexpectedly, his voice tentative. "Maybe diversity makes us stronger? Different perspectives, different capabilities?" The comment drew a sharp look from Victor, but before he could respond, Liam Foster stood up and stretched. "Anyone want to take a night hike? Check out the view from that ridge we passed about a mile back?" Several hands went up, including Fallon's. The group that formed for the night hike was interesting. Liam, Leo, Alex Theron, who would wait at the base of the ridge, and surprisingly, Dax Coleman and Kane Orin, who seemed intrigued by the idea. Victor declined, citing the need to maintain camp security, but his real motivation seemed to be avoiding any activity where Fallon might demonstrate competence, where he couldn't control the narrative. The night hike proved to be a revelation. Away from Victor's aggressive leadership and constant commentary, the group dynamic shifted dramatically. Fallon moved through the darkness with confident grace. Her night vision and trail sense were clearly superior to most of the others, her footsteps light and precise. When Dax Coleman stumbled in a particularly rocky section, she effortlessly steadied him, her grip suggesting significant reserves of strength. "Jesus, Hayes," Dax whispered, a genuine note of awe in his voice as they navigated a steep section of trail. "You move like a ghost out here." "Infantry training," she replied simply. "You learn to move quietly when your life depends on it." The ridge offered spectacular views of the coastline, with the lights of distant cities twinkling like scattered stars below them. For 30 minutes, the small group sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about service, sacrifice, and the profound beauty of the natural world they'd fought to protect. "This is why I love these trips," Liam said quietly. "Reminds you what really matters." The hike back to camp was uneventful, but Fallon noticed something that the others missed, something her honed instincts immediately flagged. The weather was changing. The wind had shifted, carrying the unmistakable briny smell of rain from the ocean, and the temperature was dropping faster than the forecast had predicted, a cold front moving in rapidly. Her meteorological instincts, honed by years of military operations where weather could mean the difference between mission success and devastating disaster, told her that the next day might bring challenges far beyond what the group had prepared for. Back at camp, Victor was holding court around the fire, regaling the remaining Marines with another story about military toughness and the importance of traditional values, basking in their familiar admiration. The night hikers rejoined the group quietly, but Fallon could sense that something had shifted in the dynamic. Dax Coleman and Kane Orin were looking at her differently, with a recognition that hadn't been there before, a dawning understanding. The group began turning in around 10 p.m., with various levels of preparation for the rapidly dropping temperature. Fallon had been right about her setup. Her tarp and sleeping bag combination kept her warm and dry through the night, while several tent campers found themselves struggling with condensation and inadequate insulation, shivering in the cold. At 3:17 a.m., Fallon's eyes snapped open instantly, her combat-trained senses picking up something profoundly wrong in the sounds of the night. The wind had intensified dramatically, howling through the trees, and she could hear the ominous crack and groan of stressed, swaying trees in the surrounding forest. Rain was falling steadily, a cold, relentless deluge, and the temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees Fahrenheit from when they'd gone to sleep, plummeting dangerously. She lay still for several minutes, listening, assessing, her mind automatically running through countless contingency plans, evaluating threats and resources. This wasn't the gentle autumn weather they'd been promised. This was the kind of sudden, violent storm system that could transform a pleasant camping trip into a desperate life-or-death survival situation. The first scream came at 3:24 a.m. Fallon was on her feet instantly, her body moving before her conscious mind had fully processed the terrifying sound. Somewhere in the absolute darkness beyond the camp, someone was in serious trouble. The scream came again, definitely human, definitely terrified, coming from the direction of the trail they'd used for their night hike. "Help! Oh God, help us!" The voice was Private Leo Walsh's, high-pitched with raw panic and agonizing pain. Fallon grabbed her powerful flashlight and ran toward the sound, her bare feet finding purchase on the wet, slippery ground with the sure-footedness of someone who'd moved through hostile territory in utter darkness for years. Behind her, she could hear the camp slowly coming alive, confused voices, the rustle of people struggling out of sleeping bags, the fumbling with flashlights. Victor Sterling's voice, filled with a raw, uncharacteristic panic, demanded to know what was happening. She found Leo 50 yards from camp, kneeling beside two motionless figures on the treacherous trail. In the harsh, piercing beam of her flashlight, Fallon immediately understood what had happened. A massive redwood, its root system compromised by the sudden torrential rainfall and the high, relentless winds, had fallen across the trail. Liam Foster and Rex Corvus had been caught underneath, pinned by enormous branches and bleeding heavily, their forms barely visible beneath the fallen giant. They went out to check the weather, Leo babbled, his voice shaking uncontrollably with shock and terror. The tree just came down. I couldn't move it. I couldn't." Fallon was already moving, her combat training taking over, overriding any emotion as she rapidly assessed the casualties. Liam was conscious but clearly trapped by a large splintered branch across his legs. Blood was already soaking through his pants from what looked like a compound fracture, a bone piercing the skin. Rex was unconscious, with a gaping head wound bleeding profusely, his breathing shallow and dangerously irregular, a clear sign of severe trauma. Both men needed immediate medical attention, the kind that was hours away through difficult terrain and worsening weather conditions. "Leo, go back to camp," Fallon ordered, her voice cutting through his panic, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions under unimaginable pressure. "Tell Victor we need everyone up here now, and have someone try to get a cell signal. We need to call for help." As Leo stumbled back toward camp, his small flashlight beam bobbing frantically, Fallon knelt beside the wounded Marines and began the kind of triage assessment she'd performed too many times in Afghanistan, her movements precise, efficient. The tree was too heavy to move without specialized equipment they simply didn't have, an immovable obstacle. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, the rain turning into a relentless downpour, making helicopter evacuation utterly unlikely, if not impossible, even if they could call for help. The nearest road was 5 miles away through increasingly treacherous terrain, a seemingly insurmountable distance. In that moment, as cold rain soaked through her clothes and the wind howled like a banshee through the trees above, Fallon Hayes realized that the test Victor Sterling had designed for her was about to become very real. But it wouldn't be a test of whether she could keep up with the group or contribute to team cohesion. Instead, it would be a brutal, undeniable test of whether she, the quiet woman they had mocked for her dietary choices, could save the lives of men who had questioned her strength, doubted her capabilities, and dismissed her as a liability. The mountain had delivered its ultimate challenge, and Sergeant Fallon Hayes was about to prove what kind of Marine she really was. Ban hon ton dung, Twai vokung shin loi vida viet part 5 dai honyo kava lap lai loi veso tu, de la mot sai sot engim trong qua toi. The parking lot of VFW post 25,563, now illuminated by the frantic flashing lights of emergency vehicles, buzzed with urgent energy. Ambulances, fire trucks, and a medevac helicopter filled the lot. Paramedian rushed forward as Fallon Hayes, exhausted but resolute, staggered from the tree line, gently lowering Gunnery Sergeant Rex Corvus onto a stretcher. "Ma'am, you need medical attention," one of the EMTs said, noting her hypothermic symptoms and obvious exhaustion. "I'm fine," Fallon replied, her voice raspy but clear. "How's Liam?" "Stable and en route to trauma surgery," the paramedic replied, a note of awe in his voice. "You saved his life." As Rex Corvus was loaded into the helicopter, a flight medic approached Fallon. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. Carrying 2 men 5 miles each through that terrain in these conditions. It's not humanly possible." Fallon was about to offer a humble answer when she heard Captain Victor Sterling's voice. "It is if you're Fallon Hayes." She turned to find not just Victor, but the entire group of Marines. Their faces, illuminated by the emergency lights, showed awe, shame, and reverence. Sergeant Dax Coleman was openly weeping. "I owe you an apology," Victor said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter rotors, devoid of his usual bluster. "I was wrong about everything, about strength, about what makes a Marine, about what really matters." Private Leo Walsh stepped forward, his young face streaked with tears and rain. "Fallon, we looked you up while you were gone. Your service record, the medals, the commendations. Why didn't you ever tell us?" Fallon looked at her fellow veterans, men who'd spent 3 years questioning her worth. She could have been angry, could have humiliated them. Instead, she felt only exhaustion and a deep sadness for the time they'd wasted. "Because it didn't matter what I'd done before," she said quietly. "What mattered was what I was willing to do when it counted." Corporal Alex Theron rolled his wheelchair closer. 3 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, Navy Cross for valor under fire. "You're a goddamn legend, and we've been treating you like a Marine who made different choices," Fallon finished, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "Which is exactly what I am." The helicopter lifted off, carrying Rex Corvus toward the trauma center. As the sound of rotors faded, Fallon stood in the parking lot, surrounded by Marines who finally understood that strength comes in many forms. Heroism isn't measured by what you eat or how loudly you speak, but by your willingness to sacrifice. The mountain had tested all of them. Only Fallon had answered without hesitation. The woman they'd mocked for her vegetarian diet had carried 2 wounded Marines to safety, redefining their understanding of courage and reminding them all what it truly meant to be a Marine. The story of Fallon Hayes' impossible rescue mission spread through the veteran community like wildfire. This was deeper, more personal, carrying the weight of recognition. Within hours, the emergency room at Monterey County Hospital had become an impromptu gathering place for Marines who'd driven from across California to check on their wounded brothers and to see the woman who'd carried them to safety. Liam Foster, his legs immobilized, held court from his hospital bed, telling anyone who would listen about the 5-mile journey that had saved his life. "She moved like a ghost," he repeated. "Every time I thought she might break, she just kept going." Rex Corvus's condition remained critical, but his vital signs were stable, doctors crediting Fallon's quick decision-making and rapid evacuation. Another hour delay, Dr. Lena Albright told the assembled Marines, and Sergeant Corvus would have suffered irreversible brain damage or death. Fallon herself had been treated for exhaustion, dehydration, and mild hypothermia, but refused to stay overnight. By noon the following day, she was back at the Wild Heart Haven, quietly returning to her work with traumatized animals as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Her supervisor, Director Reese Dalton, found her in Kennel 12 with Titan, the aggressive German Shepherd. "You know there are reporters calling here," Reese said. "CNN, Fox News. Everyone wants to talk to the woman who carried 2 Marines to safety." Fallon continued her gentle ministrations to Titan. "I carried 2 Marines," she corrected quietly, "and they weren't stories for reporters. They were Marines who needed help. But the story had taken on a life of its own, amplified by social media posts and the human fascination with heroism." The Marine Corps' Public Affairs Office had been fielding calls from news organizations across the country. Captain Victor Sterling found himself in an uncomfortable spotlight as reporters tracked down members of the Whisperwind Peaks expedition. His 3 years of dismissive comments about Fallon's diet and capabilities had been witnessed by too many people. "I was wrong," he told Mia Santos of Channel 7 News, his bluster replaced by genuine humility. "Dead wrong about everything. Fallon Hayes is the finest Marine I've ever served with, and I spent 3 years too blind to see it." The interview, broadcast during the evening news, showed a broken man grappling with his prejudices. Asked about Fallon's vegetarian diet, Victor struggled. "I thought strength meant one thing," he said finally. "I thought being a Marine meant fitting a certain image. Fallon Hayes taught me that real strength comes from character, not protein consumption. Real Marines don't judge each other by dietary choices. They judge each other by what they do when lives are on the line." The story resonated far beyond military circles. Dr. Elise Conway, the Veteran Support Group facilitator, found herself fielding calls from other therapists who wanted to understand how someone could endure such harassment while maintaining grace and dignity. "She never responded with anger," Dr. Conway explained. "She simply continued being who she was, a healer, a protector, someone whose strength came from service rather than dominance. When the moment of truth arrived, that authentic strength proved infinitely more valuable." The transformation in the Veteran Support Group was immediate and profound. Sergeant Dax Coleman, one of Fallon's most persistent tormentors, appeared at the next Thursday meeting with a prepared statement, reading with shaking hands. "I want to apologize to Fallon Hayes and to everyone," he began, voice barely audible. "For 3 years I participated in behavior unworthy of a Marine. I made assumptions based on ignorance and prejudice. Fallon Hayes embodied everything we claim to value: courage, sacrifice, loyalty, honor, and we mocked her because she ate differently. That ends now." Similar transformations swept the veteran community. Marine Corps League chapters began examining their cultures, questioning their definition of strength and brotherhood. Fallon, dismissed as weak, had sparked crucial conversations about toxic masculinity and prejudice. General Evelyn Thorne, Commandant of the Marine Corps, issued a powerful statement distributed worldwide. "Corporal Hayes's actions remind us that heroism comes in many forms," the statement read. "Strength is not defined by appearance or dietary choices. The Corps is strongest when we judge Marines by their character and actions rather than conformity to arbitrary standards." Media attention grew. Fallon's story hit the front page of the Washington Post, featured on Time magazine's cover. The Today Show, Good Morning America, and 60 Minutes all requested interviews, but Fallon remained focused on her work, healing, protecting, and serving others without fanfare. "The real measure of this story," she told Dr. Conway privately, "isn't what I did on that mountain. It's whether people learn something about judging others, about the many different ways strength can manifest." Pressed by reporters, Fallon humbly stated, "Any Marine would have done the same thing. We don't leave people behind. That's not about being vegetarian or carnivore, male or female. That's about being a Marine." The mountain tested them all, but Fallon understood the real test was character. In carrying 2 wounded Marines, she carried a reminder that true strength comes from service. Real courage is quiet, and the most powerful warriors are often those who appear gentlest in times of peace. The people who'd mocked her diet would never make that mistake again. 6 months later, Fallon stood before a packed auditorium at the Fortis Marine Academy in Quantico, Virginia. The invitation came from the Commandant's office, part of a new initiative examining leadership and inclusion. Her new position with the Resilient Warriors Foundation brought opportunities to develop programs for marginalized veterans, combining her healing instincts with military culture. "When I enlisted," Fallon began, "I thought I knew what strength looked like: aggressive, loud, intimidating. Fitting in meant adopting a certain lifestyle, eating certain foods." She paused, letting her words sink in. 3 years ago, fellow Marines questioned my strength because I chose not to eat meat. I endured harassment because I didn't fit their definition. Colonel James Patterson, a career infantry officer, shifted uncomfortably. Fallon's story was required reading. What they didn't know, Fallon continued, was that I'd served 3 combat deployments, earned 2 Purple Hearts, and received the Navy Cross for actions under fire. My service record wasn't the point. The point was that they decided my worth based on superficial characteristics. Fallon showed a slide of Liam Foster walking, fully recovered. Doctors said he'd never walk normally. They were wrong. Marines exceed expectations. Another slide, Rex Corvus promoted to Staff Sergeant. Neurosurgeons weren't sure he'd survive his brain injury. They underestimated proper medical care. The final slide showed the expedition group at a reunion, faces transformed from prejudice to humility and respect. These Marines learn strength comes in many forms. Courage isn't always loud, and the dismissed might be the ones we need most. The auditorium was silent, hundreds of Marines hanging on every word. Captain Victor Sterling now runs diversity and inclusion workshops for Marine Corps League chapters. He tells his own story of prejudice and transformation, helping others recognize biases. Fallon's presentation continued for 40 minutes, weaving lessons about leadership and judging others by surface characteristics. The Marine Corps is at its strongest when we judge each other by our actions, not our appearances, Fallon concluded. During Q&A, a young Lance Corporal asked how to change decades-old cultures. One person at a time, Fallon smiled. One conversation at a time, one act of courage at a time. You change them by being authentically yourself and letting your actions speak louder than other people's assumptions. After, General Evelyn Thorne personally thanked Fallon. Your story has sparked conversations throughout the Marine Corps. Thank you, ma'am, Fallon replied. But real credit goes to Liam and Rex, and to the Marines who had the courage to examine their own prejudices. As Fallon left Quantico, she reflected on her journey. Her primary focus now was helping marginalized veterans. Liam Foster texted, "You're changing the world one Marine at a time." Dax Coleman, "My daughter's joining the Marines next year. She's a vegetarian too. Thank you for showing her that she belongs." Fallon learned true strength isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about being authentically yourself and serving regardless of opinion. She proved real Marines don't judge by diet or appearance. They judge by action when others need help. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply being who you are without apology. She found that courage in carrying wounded Marines. The real rescue was redefining strength. And so, Fallon Hayes' extraordinary journey reminds us how easily we misjudge the depth of strength hidden beneath an unassuming exterior. She faced relentless mockery, dismissed as weak and clueless, yet revealed a profound courage and unwavering spirit that defied every expectation. Her silent resilience, her classified past, and her undeniable capabilities redefined what it truly means to be powerful. The quiet acts of justice that followed, where her tormentors faced the direct consequences of their own arrogance, proved that truth always finds a way. This is the kind of story veteran biker loves to share, tales of raw courage, unexpected heroes, and the profound lessons hidden in plain sight. If Fallon's journey resonated with you, if it sparked inspiration, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps us know what stories connect most. And if you haven't already, subscribe and join the veteran biker community. We're constantly bringing you narratives that explore strength, perseverance, and the often unseen battles that shape us all. What was the most impactful moment for you in Fallon's story? Did her quiet strength surprise you, or did you see it coming? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comment section below. We love hearing from you and engaging with your perspectives. And while you're here, don't miss out on more incredible true-to-life stories. Check out the videos appearing on your screen right now. They're handpicked just for you. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being a part of the veteran biker journey. We deeply appreciate your support.